What's up, guys? It's Terry
and Rowan,
bringing you another episode of the HSC Economics Review from Artist Smart TV.
So what are we covering today?
We're on to part 2 of our analysis of the 2023-24 federal budget. We've previously done a video of a brief overview about what the budget's about, and we've broken down how it connects with economic growth. Today we're moving on to looking at its effects on the labour market.
Awesome, which is clearly, I think, an exciting sort of time right now for the labour market.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot going on. And particularly, I think, where we want to start, right, is we've got an unemployment rate right now sitting 3.5%.
Yeah,
right?
Very, very interesting, unprecedented times. I think no one would have predicted that we'd be in this position coming out from COVID. I think it's a very important question to ask ourselves. What do you do with the labour market when we've gone past the Nauru and we've stayed there? We haven't moved up. What do you do?
And then exactly what role does fiscal policy play, right, in that environment? Which is, I think, why this is an interesting budget to look at. And certainly what we're going to cover in this episode is we're going to look at the specific budget policies that are really looking at trying to target challenges within the labour market, and then we're going to do some analysis right on the back end, which you can use to inform your own analysis in your extended response essays. Now, where we always want to start here is that ultimately when you're analysing the effect of the budget, you really got to look at it in terms of, well, what the economic objective is. What is it setting out to achieve? And, Terry highlighted something already, which was, it's the Nauru, right? So what is the Nauru and how is that linked to, the objective here?
Yeah. So for the purposes of our course, the Nauru is the full employment rate. The rate where basically everybody who should have a job will find one and get one. And so it's only ever estimated, so we don't ever have a full exact number for that. But as long as in traditional thinking, the labour market, traditionally you just want to get as close to the Nauru as possible. Usually that's from bringing the unemployment rate down to the Nauru. Now we're in the opposite. The Nauru is actually higher than where we are with unemployment. So most official estimates go with about 4.25, anywhere from 4 to 4.5%, as where our Nauru has been. Now I remember a couple of years back that was estimated at 5.5. Yeah. So we've gone from 5.5 to 5 to 4.5. So 4.25, I should say. The unemployment rate has been sub 4 for pretty much a year now, and so we've gotten to 3.5% as of May this year. In terms of what the government's forecasting, they're forecasting to actually rise a little bit to basically the Nauru by the June quarter of this year, by next year, and to be 4.5 by in the year after that. So not a lot of movement, but they are expecting it to kick up a little bit.
And so I think the question here then is it's a bit of a weird thing to analyse, isn't it? Because we've already achieved the objective. Right, in terms of, it's already there, it's well under. Yeah. And in fact, if anything, we're saying...
We're trying to fail a little.
Yeah, we're trying to, it's too low, right? Yeah. And we're trying to get it up a little bit. So I think let's look at, first of all, some of the policies that this budget implements, right? But I think we need to unpick that a little bit more, right? Because it is a bit of a weird scenario to be in, particularly when you're analysing the policy. So what's some of the things this budget's doing? And maybe let's start just with the outcome.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go as well. So the first thing is we've got to recognise that even with these amazing unemployment outcomes, we actually had a budget surplus in 2022-23, which probably should be no surprise. We had a lot of people working. I think there was an extra 500,000 workers than expected, so a lot more people paying tax. So we got that surplus of 19 billion. And then this year we've kind of gone back the other way and we said, well, we do have a bit of a price stability problem that we need to deal with, which is another thing that conflicts with unemployment via the Phillips curve, right? And so we recognise that we do need to bring that inflation down, and hopefully, at least at this situation, we've got room to really increase that unemployment level if we need to bring the inflation back down via the Phillips curve short run relationship.
So what you're really saying here, and this goes to something I know the RBA has also highlighted quite a bit, is that we're in a situation where to deal with inflation, we actually need to worsen the unemployment figure.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds weird to say that, right? But that's sort of the root, right? We've got a problem that because we've got such a low unemployment rate, we've got no spare capacity in the labour market, and that then is at some point, right, playing a role in contributing, or at least maybe not contributing, but certainly maintaining high levels of inflation.
But I almost feel like this is a bit of a chicken and egg problem, because I always look at it as, well, why is the unemployment rate so low? It's almost because inflation's so high that it's become so unaffordable
that you need to
that you actually have to work even if you don't need to work. Yeah. So it's obviously not a simple situation to be in.
So the thing that's interesting about all of this then is we have, we've got a deficit budget of 13.9 billion that's planned for this year, which is mildly expansionary. Now, typically, a mildly expansionary budget would usually stimulate the labour market, right? Simply because it's derived demand. So it's derived, an expansionary budget is going to, grow economic growth. And that in turn is going to have a positive impact on the labour market. So we're in a bit of an unusual situation here where we're saying that the budget is saying we're going to have a mildly expansionary stance. It's going to, positively contribute to economic growth. We should be seeing economic growth of at least 1.5%, according to the government's projections, which should therefore then produce maybe some level of derived demand, maybe. Yet we're saying actually, and the government's also saying, no, we expect the unemployment rate to go up.
I think there's two little things that I'd like to point out that might be able to explain. So the first thing is to look at the RBA stance, and they've been very, very heavily contractionary. So they've been very clear on that. And, you touched on the aggregate demand. So obviously, if you have a contractionary monetary policy stance, that's also going to have contractionary effects as well.
And so just to pause, that's a really important thing to highlight. Often when you're evaluating policy and the impact here, you've got to think about it in a macroeconomic context. It's not just about fiscal policy, right? It is also about, well, how does macro policy play together, right? And so clearly we can see here that actually it's probably monetary that's doing the hard work, that's maybe pulling this down. So you had a second point.
My second point was just that most of, a lot of what we've been discussing so far has been quite textbook theory. And, we've said it's interesting, it's weird. And that's exactly the point that I want to make, is that your textbooks were written in the context of not being not having an unemployment rate lower than full employment. So there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had here. And I think, again, if you can make that point, and then it would be a really, really strong point for evaluation and assessment.
Yeah, definitely. So now let's jump in and look at some of the specific policies, right? I think that goes to at least what the budget's trying to do, big picture, some of the weird things with the objective itself. The first thing I guess we want to highlight is that what this budget's really therefore about from a labour market point of view is really trying to look at skill shortages, and it's trying to look at parts of the labour market that maybe have been neglected, right? So it's trying to be a lot more surgical, if that makes sense, which is hard for, fiscal policy more broadly. So the first thing that they've really looked at is a 5-year national skills agreement. It starts in 2024, basically aimed at trying to make sure that the vocational education sector is able to provide the right training for emerging industries, right? So care, clean energy, digital sectors. So it's basically a bit of a realization like, hey, how do we train more people? But particularly for emerging opportunities that maybe, there's not a uni degree, or maybe you don't need to go 3 years, 5 years to university for, but we need to train more people. So particularly, right, they're funding over 300,000, TAFE and vocational ed training places to make them fee-free. And then part of that is also to make a priority for women and First Nations Australians. So again, specific groups, as we've highlighted, in the economy. So that's the first thing. That's part of really a trend in what they're trying to do. What else have they got?
So apart from your national skills agreement, you've also got the Australian skills guarantee. So they're really, really focusing on that skills aspect. So with this one, it's ensuring 1 in 10 workers on major government-funded construction and ICT projects will be either an apprentice or trainee. So as Rowan was saying, really providing those pathways and opportunities for especially younger people to kind of step in. So Rowan mentioned women and First Nations Australians. This one here is talking about, it's also going to have a focus on providing opportunities for women in a predominantly non-women dominated industry, like in construction.
So again, a lot of this goes to skill shortages. Why are skill shortages important to address? I mean, one, if we have them, it makes it much harder in terms of our long-term, supply side, productive capacity of the economy. It creates ongoing inflationary pressure as well if we're not able to provide it. And I think fundamentally as well, it's actually over the long term what helps us bring the NAIRU down actually as well. Okay, now it's already It's already been getting lower. But it also plays into that, which is all about like over the long term, really increasing the productive capacity of the economy.
So I guess would it be a stretch to say that you would almost want to bring the Nauru down just to make sure that we're no longer below it?
Well, that's one way to handle it, right? Isn't it? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Now, there's a couple of other things they do, right? One, they've got a teacher workforce action plan. Again, they're trying to really be quite strategic. Where are their problems, right? So that, maybe, Terry, you can speak to this a little more.
Yeah, so if you're new to the channel, I actually am an economics teacher in the New South Wales education system. And I can definitely speak firsthand to it. There's been very, very significant shortages, especially in some very key specific areas. Like I can speak on STEM, I can speak on applied arts. Those areas definitely lacking in teachers. They've got librarian training, they've got counsellor training. So there's all kinds of new funding that we can see here in this 328 million package that they've brought forward. They're noticing that there's been a very poor level of retention for teaching. So I think that's one of the things that we can maybe highlight with these policies is that it's not enough really just to get the ball rolling and put some money in something. You've got to actually really think about it. So when I go back and I look at the National Skills Agreement, I think back to some of those those Scott Morrison, Jobmaker, the very catchy job something policies. It's similar. It's very, very similar, very borrowed from that. But it's almost like as they have more goes of it, they start to refine and figure out how do we actually attract people to these programs, but also retain them.
And I'd say the big difference here is that they're very, very targeted. I think that's the big change, right? We've moved from a period of COVID where, we needed to have big expenditure across a range of industries to now going, great, where are the challenges and how can we sort of address them? Now, the other big one here, I think that's been really quite significant, okay, is cheaper childcare. So a really big factor is, how do you get more parents back into the workforce, right? And a lot of the time, the big sort of challenge is the cost of childcare, right? So one of the big things they've done is from the 1st of July 2023, the cost of childcare is being reduced for 1.2 million families to, again, really lift the labour force participation rate, right? They're trying to get more people in the working age population to actively start seeking work, which in the short term will increase the unemployment rate because people are actively seeking work but might be unemployed. But really, once again, it's trying to encourage just an increase in the working force. In the participation rate.
And just to touch on it, they wouldn't mind a small increase in the unemployment. In fact, that they've actually forecasted it. So.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So now let's just do some analysis, again, in helping you sort of take some of this and these policies that we've been talking about and going, great, what does this mean, right, in terms of the economic issue itself? And so I think the first thing to really highlight here, right, is that, I think big picture, like everyone is sort of acknowledging, okay, like we're below the Nauru, right? And actually, we're going to see unemployment increase, right? I think that's broadly the case, but not because of the budget, right? There's nothing in this budget that says, hey, this budget is going to cause it to increase. It's because of the macroeconomic policy mix.
Yeah, so they're not actively going out and, for example, implementing. So in one of the things you learn in this course is structural unemployment. They're not actively going and cutting jobs or cutting industries. As we looked at in the growth video, they do have investment in new industries. So there are jobs being created. There's specific targeted support to try and get people into areas of need, but those tend to probably be of a more long-term nature. And so the way I'm looking at this is it's focused on improving, getting to full employment, but they're keeping it deliberately to more of a long-term picture. Because in the short term, as the Deputy Governor, Michelle Bullock said, and congratulations to her for her new appointment, she said that she's actually going to be happy for economic growth and unemployment to actually kind of grow below trend for a little bit and just kind of catch up, if you will.
And so I think this also then goes to the criticism though, okay, and the limitation of all of this, which is that one, it's all well and good, we're going to see, and the government's obviously not trying to grow unemployment, right? Clearly.
Political suicide.
Yeah. And, but really that's an admission that they're going to let the RBA, right, through, trying to manage inflation, drive unemployment up, right? Now, at the same time, right, the consequence of that is that you have a situation, and a number of economists have highlighted, right, that, okay, while it is a tried and proven method to reduce inflation, right, you see the economy slow, you see unemployment go up. The problem is it risks pushing thousands of people into poverty, right, because they lose their jobs, okay, and then they're on government benefits, and with inflation, their real income was already falling, but certainly government benefits haven't increased at the pace that inflation has either. And so you see a challenge where you basically are acknowledging, okay, through this, right, we're going to see more people pushed to the poverty line. And so one of the big criticisms, and this is again really a conflict in objectives at the end of the day, right, is that the criticism was, well, Jobseeker probably needed to be lifted, right, in all of this. Okay, like the criticism was like, we probably needed to lift it by, really about $25 a day. Okay, now in saying that, they increased it by less than $3 a day. So they did make an increase to Jobseeker. It was a very small increase, right? But it was nowhere near the amount that probably would offset the challenge that we're going to have here, whereas unemployment increases and the cost of living is just shot through the roof, that we see more people, as we're getting inflation down, fall into this situation. Now, of course, there's another conflict in this, right? Which is, if they're going to spend more on Jobseeker, what's going to happen to the size of the deficit? Yeah.
But before we get into that, can I just quickly talk about Jobseeker? Because I was very, very happy that you brought that up, because I was going to bring that up as well. So with Jobseeker, as much as it's important it is to increase it to existing recipients of the welfare payments, it's also important to increase the availability of it. So there was only a very small group that actually received increased eligibility for Jobseeker, and I believe that was in the 50s.
That's right,
like the 50-year-old age group. So they're also isolating those people who aren't in that age group by, first of all, not only giving them a $3 per day increase, but also not expanding the eligibility for those people. So you're right, Ron. They absolutely have, they're very justified in saying that yes, we do want unemployment to potentially go up a little bit, but I don't think they've really provided the necessary support to do that. And in the past they have shown the capacity to do that. So I just want to quickly bring up a quick example. So when the carbon tax came in back in 2012, they also increased the tax-free threshold to offset that. So we've seen examples of where they are capable of, talking about this balancing act, doing one thing and then offsetting it. They are capable of doing that. And unfortunately, it seems like they have come up a little short in this sense. So very important to recognize that. Yeah.
I mean, look, and again, to say that it is a complex balance at the end of the day.
It's not easy.
That's right.
It's easy for us to sit here and talk about it on YouTube.
So I think, look, there are probably a number of the real big sort of like limitations or criticisms, right, that are playing in. Now, of course, underneath all of this, there is also, just the concerns around wage growth, also, like we're having our greatest wage growth that we've had in a number of years, okay?
Nominally,
right? Okay, really important to highlight, which is fantastic. But at the same time, we've also got the challenge that we're seeing growing inflation, which is eroding, the real purchasing power. And even though the RBA has warned, well, we've got to keep an eye out for a wage price inflationary spiral. The good news, we haven't seen that. But I guess in all of this, right, I think that the key point here is the budget. I think made big statements around, and the government made big statements around, we're going to help people manage the cost of living. I know that's a different objective, right?
Yeah.
But it does feed in, because often the relationship between your cost of living and employment, like if you've got, a good job that's paying you and your real wage is not declining, your ability to have better living standards and manage cost of living improves. So they're quite tightly interacting. And so there's question marks, I think, on, okay, could the government have still done more here in the labour market outside of targeted skill shortages to support people?
Yeah, I absolutely think so, because I think there was also some interesting analysis that came from Ross Gittins, where he basically talked about the wage price spiral, which you mentioned. And the fact is that when that was, I guess, introduced into the vernacular of economics, it was a very different society. Structurally, we're in a very different point. Union membership is in the 15% range. It's
it was 46%, right, at the time, right? So I've just brought it up. In the 1980s, it was almost 1 in 2.
We simply don't have the same bargaining power that we once did to trigger a wage price spiral. So, kind of throwing out that comment for me feels a little bit dismissive of the genuine struggles of the Australian people, right? To say, oh, we've avoided a wage price spiral, but look, mate, that was never going to happen. Union memberships are down. Companies have, if anything, become more concentrated in their power and their capacity to essentially not have to give pay rises. And so I think for me personally, no pun intended, it's a bit rich to come from the economists who have said that.
So one final thing we want to share here before we wrap, I think, this video up in terms of analysis on the labour market. I think one of the things that's interesting that we haven't talked about is also the government's policy, which didn't really fit into the budget, but it relates, which is their policy on immigration. right? So I know that can be a contentious thing to talk about. And again, trying to put politics aside from it, right? And just to look at the impacts of it. I think the government has really opened up in terms of immigration post COVID. And a big part of that is Australia has historically, certainly over the last 10 years, even 20 arguably, relied on net growth in immigration to drive economic growth, right? It's been a contributing factor to economic growth. And so as we've seen, and we saw that we had, a net outflow during COVID, it also created a drag effect on the economy. So what's happened is we've seen big increases again in immigration opening up. And we've got some interesting data here, right, that shows that an ANU, a study led by an ANU professor, basically found that there's a 2.6% fall in hourly wages for incumbent workers for every 1% increase in the share of the community comprised of recent immigrants, right? Which is, I think, and so what I'm trying to highlight here is the government's been in a little bit of a tricky situation, okay? Like, we've had major supply shortages, right? We're below the Nauru. We've had a shrinking population, which is impacting economic growth. We as a country, Australia is being built on immigrants. I mean, both Terry and I.
Yeah. Come from families of immigrants.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So we've clearly, we're clearly a country that's built on really people from all around the world coming here. It plays a key role in our economic growth, key role in our labour market, right? Absolutely key role in our labour market. It then gets a little bit tricky here, though, because we're seeing wage growth being slow, right? And we're seeing a situation where we're going to see unemployment increase, and yet we've also got record levels of immigration coming in. And so I just want to highlight, it's just something to talk about, because it's certainly something that's being picked up in a lot more stories in the media, and how do you get the balance of all of these things right, okay? Yeah. And it just, I think, feeds into, again, in part, the government's approach to the labour market. I mean, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to echo, with what you were saying about how difficult it is to really strike that balance. Rowan and I, we've sat here and we've poked holes, we've asked questions, but realistically, we don't have. I wouldn't say, at least me personally,
I don't have the answers.
I don't have the answers. Rowan doesn't have the answers. And so it is obviously a very difficult, balancing act. And I think, as a student of economics, we definitely don't expect you to have the answers. Yeah. You're welcome to come up with your answers if you want. But in terms of what you probably should be putting in terms of your analysis, it's just making sure that you you first of all understand these problems. You understand that there's so many different questions and so many things to balance, and that you try and articulate a few of those in your analysis.
So I think that the point is, when it comes to analysis, sometimes actually what good analysis is it's raising that there's a question here. Yeah. Right?
Just recognizing that it's there. Yeah. You don't have to answer it.
Yeah. It's just saying, look, this is something that needs to be solved. It's a problem. Exactly. You don't need to then go and have the solution. Although if you do, maybe, your long-term careers as a budding economist,
or
right?
just write to your local member.
Yeah. Awesome. So look, that is it for our second video on the budget analysis on the labour market and economic growth. Hopefully you've got a clearer sense of the policies that's included, what it's trying to achieve, and some analysis that you can use in your essay. If you haven't already, hit subscribe. We'll have more videos going through some of the other economic issues and the budget's impact on them. If you have any questions, as I said, leave it in the comments. One of our team will jump in and help. Otherwise,
thank you very much. See you next time.